Up where we left in the last class. Last class we did the Harabayas, we did the Ezras Nashim, and we did the 7 entrances to the Azara. And then we rushed a little bit towards the end. Didn't know there would be a follow-up. So we'll go back to where we started rushing, which is basically the Ezras Yisrael. So when you come to the Ezras Yisrael basically is the area that a Yisrael could enter in, as long as the Yisrael is not involved in any Avodah. That's the extent of until where Yisrael could go. Even though Rashi says, when it says Eimdim Tzfufim, Rashi says Eimdim Tzfufim is Meloshin Tzuf, that they actually flooded around and they went all the way into the back, even of the Heichel, of the 11 Amos back there. But on the simplest of levels, the limit of where the Yisrael is allowed to enter into the Azara, unless the Yisrael is involved in some Aveda, like for example, Shchita Ksher Bazar, is up to this, is in this area of the Ezras Yisrael. And it says that the Yidden would come here lishtachave to lispalel, to bow to the Eibishter and to daven. Now the size of the Ezras Yisrael is taka. It's one of the most pronounced and stark in terms of how small it is, considering that this is the limit of where Yidden can enter. It's 135 amas by 11 amas, which what that looks like. Let's use the example in Crown Heights, is from Eastern Parkway to Union, and it's just the sidewalk. The truth is, it's even a little less than the sidewalk. I used the measuring tape. I was on the sidewalk. I measured it. I think it's around 18 feet, and 11 amas is closer to 17 and a half feet. So that's the entire place of the Ezras Yisrael. What's pshat? Such a small little area. I didn't see anything written on it. It could be it was a nest. So somebody asked, a nest, okay, but how many people? But once you're entering into the area of a nest, it doesn't make a difference if you could add one more than what should naturally fit, or 100 more. It's all the same. Either it fits or it doesn't. But it stands out how small of an area it is. And then if they add to that, is that there were 8 lishachas, 8 lishkes, 8 rooms in the Ezras Yisrael. Now keep in mind, when it comes to these rooms, they don't have to be large structures. A room is good enough. I was saying, you got a house in East Flatbush, and you have 10 feet by 10 feet, you're figuring out, is it a room for 2 or 3? It didn't have to be large rooms. A walk-in closet is a good enough closet if you need to. For example, we'll see over here, they stored the salt. You don't need a room this big to store the salt. If it's 17 feet wide, you could make the room, whatever it is. You have 20 sacks of salt. You're going to take the salt. They didn't have to, they didn't spend time in the room. They took the salt and they went out and they used it for what they needed to use it for. So you have a total of 8 lishachas in the Ezras Yisrael. 3 are in the north, 3 are in the south, and then 1 on each side of the doors of Shar Nikanor. So let's start with the ones that are up north. So in the north, what you have is first the Lishkas Agazis, which is for Sanhedrin G'dayla. And the way it's set up over here is taka, the way it's brought in some places, the way it was set up. But it wasn't, I'm a little limited here with the string. So it wasn't like 3 rooms, like down here, 1 to the right, 1 in the middle, and 1 to the left. But rather the Lishkas Agazis went, went halfway. And the other 2 rooms were that way, side by side, the way it's set up over here. Now the Lishkas Agazis is where you had the Sanhedrin of 71. Now we mentioned in the previous time that Ein Yeshiva Ba'Azara Ela L'Malchi Beis David B'Vad. Only Malchi Beis David are allowed to sit in the Azara, and the Sanhedrin was not standing the whole time. So the Lishka of the Sanhedrin was partially in the Kodesh, partially in the Chayil, and in the Chayil that's where they sat. And it's brought down in the Kodesh. That's actually where they did the Geirol. They made every morning a Geirol for who's going to get the different Avedis of the Talmid Shel Shachar. So they did that in the Lishkas Agazis. Now, regarding the name Lishkas Agazis, there's a few reasons given. One is that Gazis is like when you have a Evan Gazis that's cut down, so that's where the final psak comes. Like we mentioned, if a Bezdin didn't know the din, they bring it to the Bezdin that was on the Pesach of the Ezras Nashim. If they didn't know, they brought it to the Bezdin that was in the Pesach of the Azara. If they didn't know, they brought it to the Sanhedrin. There's no such thing as a Sanhedrin not knowing. If they didn't know, they made a psak din based on not knowing, whatever it is. Safik Minater L'chumra, Midrabanan L'kula, whatever it may be. So that's one explanation for why it's called Gazis. Another explanation that's given for why it's called Gazis, that it was actually built with Gazis stones, with these nice stones. You're talking about the most prominent Sanhedrin, something that we have, we're talking about the way the Torah was given over. Speaking of Pinchas Beis Dinai, Elu Beis Dinai, the Sanhedrin is the most prominent entity when it comes to Torah. And so they built it in a very nice way, and they had these nice Gazis stones. And so the name became attached to it. People called it, the room with the Gazis stones, and it became called Lishkas Agazis. And then another reason given for why it's called Lishkas Agazis brings a pasuk where the word Gazis is used for to remove, because the main the main avodah of the Sanhedrin, so the Sanhedrin could do certain things that nobody else could do. They, for example, they could expand the kedusha of the Azara, of the Harabais. I think also of Yerushalayim. They have a lot of authority that other Bati Dinim don't have. They could paskin on, let's say, for example, by Yeronidachas. But that's not what they were Isaac. They weren't expanding the Azara every day, and they didn't have stories of Yeronidachas every day. What were they, and in terms of quantity of time, were they involved in? So they were involved in, and you have a few, I think a couple of sichos and Rebbe siyumim on them where it speaks about it. They were involved in determining the kashrus of kohanim, and if a kohen was found to be a good kohen, they made a big simcha that day, loivshim levanim and misatim levanim, and they made a whole big simcha. And if unfortunately a kohen was found not to be not to have a psul in his kohuna, so then he wore black clothing. So that was the main avodah of the Sanhedrin, was to determine the kashrus of kohanim. And as a result, it was called gazes because they would remove kohanim from being able to serve in the Beis Hamikdash. Another reason they would remove kohanim, I think, is for kohanim who were mezalzel in the mitzvahs of kohana. I think there's three reasons. Either they were not kohanim, then it's if they're mezalzel in the mitzvahs of kohana, and then there's one more that I don't recall. So those are three reasons given for the lishkas hagazes. Then we have over here the lishkas hagoyla. So that's basically where they got water, if they needed water for any purpose throughout the Zara. We know that there was a stream that flowed through that they would stuff up that it shouldn't go out. It speaks about it in the Rambam tells us about it by the Karban Pesach, and that way the water they do that in Eretz Yisrael. They have like everything's in marble over there, and the sponja, and they let the water come up. The water, could literally go sliding like in a park, and then they clean off all the floor, and then they let the water go out. So you get a real life example. But besides for that, if there was a need for any other purpose for water, maybe even drinking, it doesn't say what it was, but if they needed water, they had over here a well, and it was called the Lishkas HaGeila. Again, there's a few reasons given. One is because the Bnei HaGeila dug the well, but the other Pirush doesn't like that explanation because the Bnei HaGeila did everything. They're the ones that came back from Galus. The Eretz Yisrael was desolate until they came back, so the Bnei HaGeila did everything, not just this. Then another two explanations is either Geila refers to the because it was done with a galgal, that's how they brought up the water, or Geila refers to the pail that they used. There was a pail over there, and it brings a pasuk that the word for pail is used as Geila. So those are three reasons given for the name of the Lishkas HaGeila. And then finally you have over here the Lishkas HaEitz, which in later generations changed to the name of Lishkas Parhedrin, or Palhedrin. It's brought into, the Rambam says Parhedrin, but everywhere else it's Palhedrin. So the reason it's called Lishkas HaEitz is because it was actually eitz. It was made out of wood, which we know is a problem. The Rambam says you can't have any eitz boilet in the Azara. Leisita, it speaks about Leisita eitz al Mizbeh Hashem lekecha. From there, the Chachamim expanded it, I think, that you can't have any wood that's exposed in the Beis Hamikdash. So it's explained that it wasn't exposed, it was covered. And why was it made out of eitz? Because eitz represents both the idea that the wood is dead because it's disconnected, but it also represents longevity. Trees, they live for very long. They can be there for many, many, many decades and many lifetimes. And so the Kohen Gadol going into the Beis Hamikdash was exposing himself either chas v'shalom to a short life, he wouldn't live out the year, or to a bracha of a long life. And what's the reason it was covered? So this is actually a sikh from the Rabbi explaining the change of the name and the pnimis say none, but just in short, the Rabbi says the reason it was covered is because that's an Indian of a tzaddik. Eitz is a tzaddik, but the whole avodah of the Kohen Gadol that we're talking about over here, when was he here? It was the 7 days by Yom Kippur, before Yom Kippur. So Yom Kippur is the avodah of tshuva. And now the reason the name changed to Palhedrin or Parhedrin is because that means appointed. Because the Kehanim later on, in the times of Bayesheni, especially when he started going to the kings that were not exactly tzaddikim, Yanai among others, from the Beis Hashmonai, so they appointed the Kohen Gadol. It wasn't a person who really deserved that position, and so they changed the name to appointed. And the Rebbe in the Sikh over there explains the Mal Yusa, not only that the Kohen Gadol was ready to die, just to be able to go into the Kodesh HaKodashim, but also the name. That the idea of change represents Yom Kippur, the idea of tshuva, that there's a change. It's not just like an eitz that's growing, in the same direction, in the same pattern, in the same path, but there's an union of change, like it's something entirely new. So that you have the three Lishachas on the north, just again, the Lishkas Agazis with the Sanhedrin that had a bigger portion that was outside of the Chel, which is actually called the Chel, but it was in the Harabayas. Then you have the Lishkas HaGeila for the water, and the Lishkas Eitz, where the Kohen Gadol spent the 7 days before Yom Kippur when he was preparing for Yom Kippur. Then in the south part, you have another three Lishachas. Over there, it shows that they were set up. Could be something popped up here, and it's not. Give me a second. Okay. So the three in the south was the Lishkas HaMelach, then there was the Lishkas HaParva and the Lishkas HaMedichin. So the first one is for the salt. They needed salt both because Gal Kol Karboncha Takriv Melach. Yeah, I think we learned all the way already in one of the Rashis in Bereshis. It talks about the Mayim Tachteinim, that they weren't happy about being Mayim Tachteinim. So the salt in the water is going to be used on the Mizbeh. They also used the salt to put on the ramp, because the ramp could be slippery. Kanim could slide down. It's a big ramp. It was like 50 feet. So they put salt on the ramp so that it should have, some friction. The kohen wouldn't slip. Then to the left of it was the Lishkas HaParva. The Lishkas HaParva, so Korban Oila, we know goes up entirely to Hashem. But that refers to specifically the basar. The basar is nechel on the Mizbech. But the Eris and of other Korbanos as well, the skins were given to the Kehanim. So they actually salted them. It was a part of the process of preparing the skins to turn them into, a hide, a leather. They would salt them in this Lishkas HaParva. And on top of the Lishkas HaParva, that's where there was a mikveh. The Kohen Gadol the Kohen Gadol started in Big Day Lavan. He ended in Big Day Lavan. And then in between, he changed clothing. There was, on the two sides, right next to it was Big Day Zav. In the middle was Big Day Lavan. And for each change, he had to do one mikveh and 2 times Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. So where did he toivel then? When he came into the Beis Hamikdash before the 7 days, we said he toiveled on top of the Shara Mayim. But when he was doing the Avodah of Yom Kippur, those tefillas happened in the mikveh that was on top of the Lishkas HaParva. And the steps to get there, it says they were either in, the next one we'll talk about in a moment, the Lishkas HaMedichin, or it was on the outside. But the steps were outside of it, it's brought down. Now regarding the name Lishkas HaMelech, it's obvious, the Lishka of the salt. Lishkas HaParva it's a long story. There's also Shar Nikanor we spoke about last time. Shar Nikanor actually has brought down 9 other names. So we didn't go into that. It's a little too long. Lishkas HaParva is also very interesting. The name was a person who was a Machashev, and then it becomes a whole big question why you're giving a name of a Lishka, of a Machashev. He did Shuvah, he built it, he tried to sneak in and see what was going on, and he was killed over there. There's all different explanations for how it got that name. And then finally you have the Lishkas HaMedichin, where they wash down the innards, the insides of the animals. Now we're going to see later that they actually washed them in the shulchanis. There were tables over here to wash the insides. So also over here there's different explanations given. That I would say that maybe the simplest one is that over here they used the stomach, which was really filthy, and it's not covered to do that in the Beis Hamikdash in Lazara. It's much dirtier and more filthy. The intestines and the stomach, specific parts. So that's what those they brought to the Lishkas HaMedichin. Others say they brought to the Lishkas HaMedichin all the Karbanas Yachid. Only the Karbanas Sibur were washed on the shulchanis. There's a couple other explanations, but b'chalalos they had it. This was for things that needed extra rinsing, either because of the kamas of karbanos, of the karbanas yachid, or because of the echos in terms of the amount of filth of those parts of the animals. Sorry. And then we have 2 more lishachas. We have Lishkas Pinchas HaMalbish. So that's where they kept the Big Day Kohuna. They say it's called Pinchas HaMalbish because Pinchas was the first one that was in charge. He was a prominent chashuv a person, and so his name became connected to this lishka. And then finally, we have the lishkas eisei chavitin. So the Kohen Gadol every day would bring a minchas chavitin. So we know the Beis Hamikdash was, the operational hours were only during the day. At night, it was of some, the things that they burn. If they fell off, they put them back on. But karbanos could only be brought in the day, which also fits sort of like what we know in the Beis Hamikdash. It's yom v'layla. It's not layla v'yom. So there was all the avodah was done during the day. So and the 2 main karbanos was the Karban Tamid Shel Shachar and Bein Arbayim, and with each of them there was a Nisach Hayayin. That's when they had the Shira, and there was also the Minchas Chavitin of the Kohen Gadol. Half of it was in the morning, half was in the evening. It consisted of 12 loaves. Bechla, when you talk about the Beis Hamikdash, whether it's Lachem Apanim or these, there was no chametz in the Beis Hamikdash. A lot of times I think bread, even though we say Amitzi Lechem and Aretz on the matzah, people still associate lechem, because in Hebrew, with bread, not matzah. But in the Beis Hamikdash, except for the Karban Toida, it's forbidden to bring in. You're not allowed to have any chametz in the Beis Hamikdash. So this, what? The Karban Toida was an exception. Right. So the one exception was the Karban Toida. And the Karban Toida, I think it's the only exception. Was there another one? Shtei right. Okay, of course, and Shavuos. Lechem Apanim was matzah. The Shtei Lechem and the Karban Toida were chametz. So the Lishkas Eisei Chavitin is where the where the Kohen Gadol made, where the Minchas Chavitim was prepared. Again, you don't need a big room. You're talking about, you bring in the flour, there's a little frying pan, whatever the avodah is to prepare it. It doesn't have to necessarily be such a large room. But again, obviously, the size is striking of the Ezras Yisrael. Now, it says that there was an awning all around the Azara. This is not scaled to size because it doesn't say what size the awning was. So I think I mentioned in the last class, when you don't know the size of something, there's, I think, three possibilities. Possibility one is you have to learn some more, you'll find the size. Possibility two, there was a certain size and it's not written down. Possibility three is the reason the size is not written because obviously everything's a shkacha pratis, and certainly in the Beis Hamikdash, everything's exact. But there's a difference between something which has a din and something which doesn't. So how's it decided? The engineer decides, the architect decides, or you ask the rabbi and he'll tell you, I think you should make it this size, and you listen to him. But it means that there's not necessarily a defined size as far as halacha, so to speak, straight black and white halacha is concerned. And we mentioned last time that in the mornings, I think we mentioned it, the Kohanim, they slept in the Beis HaMoiked. They wanted to be right next to, the second that comes the morning, they're starting the Avodah. They're not coming in from Yerushalayim. And they would open up, there was a big door in the Beis HaMoiked. All the doors were 20 amos high. In those big doors, there was a smaller door. And in the morning, two groups of Kohanim would open the smaller door. They would go out and they would be boilish. They would inspect the Azara. Somebody asked me one time, what did they inspect? I said, it's a good question. I'm not sure what they inspected. It could be an inspection of covet, but it could be there was a concern of tumah. We'll see later that on top of the heichel there was a kala oirev because they didn't want birds coming in. And one of the explanations for the issue with birds is that they could bring in a sheretz. So they inspected it. Maybe it was an expression of respect to the Beis Hamikdash. You first inspect the place and then you begin the avodah on it. Or it could have been an actual inspection for something. Who knows? It's open to the sky. They went to inspect it. So they would basically break up into two groups. And then they would go around. You could see, and these people are scaled to size, by the way. That would be the size of a person in the Azara. They would meet up at the Lishkas Oisei Chavitin. I don't know if there was a specific nusach like we find very often. Is everything okay? Everything's okay? Yes, everything's okay. It's okay. Because I thought there was a nusach. And then I look in the Rabbi, it doesn't say a nusach. So I thought, maybe I made a mistake. I'm thinking of a different thing. But maybe what I thought originally is from Talmud. It could be. Shkoyach. It says, okay. They made sure the kalim, it's interesting because the kalim had a lishka. They brought them out in the morning. There's 93 kalim. They put them, Okay, so I have to look. Shekech, look into it. And then they would go back. They would go back in through the small door. They would close it, and then they would open up the bigger doors, and that's when the kohanim would stream into the Azara, and they would begin the avodah of the day, starting with the pious, with the geirul, the raffle, about which avodah each one's going to get. Now we'll move on to the Ezras Kohanim, which is exactly the same size, 135 amos by 11 amos. Again, that's around 212 feet by 17 feet, the same exact size as the Ezras Yisrael, that sidewalk of Kingston Avenue. This is basically the limit of a kohen. If a kohen is not involved in avodah, he cannot go past the Ezras Kohanim. If a kohen is involved in avodah, just like if a Yisrael is involved in something, then they could go past it. But if they're not there for a specific purpose and they're tahar, there's no issue of tumah, this is the extent of where they could go up to. Regarding the Ezras Kohanim, there was a step going into the Ezras Kohanim. It's actually unclear exactly if the steps were in the Ezras Kohanim or Ezras Yisrael, but simply, it sounds like it was in the Ezras Kohanim. So in order to get into the Ezras Kohanim was the largest step. All other steps in the Beis Hamikdash were half a amma by a half a amma. Here you have a step that's an amma high. I don't think the Rambam specifies how wide it was. I wrote that it's an amma wide, but I don't think the Rambam specifies that. Could be I couldn't find it because I was reviewing everything. I have that written. It was an amma by an amma. I couldn't find it this year. And then there was a duchan, which is basically a set of 3 steps, each a half a amma by a half a amma, meaning that to get to the Ezras Kohanim, you're going up 2.5 ammas. Now, what's interesting is in a lot of the pictures that you see, they show the duchen in the opposite direction. In other words, they show the duchen as if it's like a platform, and the Levim are performing facing the Mizbeach, and the Levi closest to the Mizbeach is lowest. Then the next one is a little higher in the platform, and the next one's even higher in the platform. But the way the Rambam is showing it is that's the opposite. The steps were coming up to the Mizbeach. That means the Levi that was closest on the duchen is highest, and the Levi next level is lower and lower, because they were coming up towards the Mizbeach. They're facing the Mizbeach b'pashtus. That's where they're making, the Shira occurred, so those 3 steps where some type of performance occurred. The steps into the Ezras Nashim, it wasn't used in that type of way. But the steps into the Azara, so we learned last time, that's what they sang by Simchas Beis Sheva. These steps over here, which are called the Duchen, is not where Birchas Kainim occurred, it's where the Shira of the Levim happened every single day. By the Karban Tamid Shel Shachar and Bein Arbaim, when they had the Nisuch HaYayin, they would sing then. And then the Rambam writes in Hilchos Tzis Kapayim, in the Sefer Ava, that the Birchas Kehanim in the Beis Hamikdash occurred on the steps to the Heichel, not on these steps that are called the Duchen. So with the Ezra's Kehanim, right away brings us to the Tzafin area. Okay, we said about the Shira. It brings us to the Tzafin area. So the Tzafin is a very important part. So first of all, the Beis Hamikdash, especially according to the Rambam, the Beis Hamikdash is a bias muchen to lahakriv by karbonis, to bring karbonis. The whole avoid in the Beis Hamikdash is karbonis. So Chassidus, we don't know about the reason, but on the simplest of levels, it's the ultimate dir b'tachlein. You're taking a gashmistic thing, a real serious gashmistic thing, rav tvuis b'kayachshar, and you're making it one with the Eibishter. You're turning into a ruchnistic thing. And so we have karbonis, as we know, the Rambam talks about in Perek Beis, Vilchas Beis Abchira, about the history of the Mizbeach, starting from Adam Rishon bringing a carbon there, and Cain and Helva brought their carbon there, and then Noach brought his carbon there, and that's where the Akedah happened, and that's the exact spot, Mekayim Mechuvin Beyeser. And so this area is called the Tzafin, and we know that Kachei Kachim Shritasan is Batzafin. And so this area was divided. The Rambam says the whole area was the Tzafin. The 76 by 60.5 amos, which is the size of the building of 770. I think it brings it up right away, so let's just see that. It's the whole building basically of 770 is the tzafin. So the whole building, all the way up to the back of the building, is the tzafin area. Now, when you're learning it in Gemara, there's a lot of different opinions, and the Ram doesn't really get into this. So the way I set it up is according to what seems like the opinion that everybody follows, is that, and it also will fit, is that all the items used for the karbonis were within this area. So even though the Rambam says the whole area is the tzafin, unlike other opinions that say no, it's only exactly in these 32 amos that are, between the Mizbeach. The Rambam says clearly it's 76 amos by 60.5 amos, which is, if I tell you the feet, it's like 119 feet by 95 feet, 120 by 95 feet. It's a large area. But I put the items in there, you'll see. So you have 8 empty amos at the beginning and 8 empty amos at the end. And then in between, you have an area where there are 24 tabais, either 4 rows of 6 or 6 rows of 4. But you can see I put them within the size of the Mizbech. Now, the way they were used, there's different opinions. There's 3 different opinions. One opinion says that they actually were able to open up the rings and they put the animal's neck in there, and that's how they shechted it. Another opinion says, no, they opened up the rings, they put the animal's hands and feet over there, and they shechted it. And the Rabbeinu Chananya says the rings weren't movable. They simply put a rope around the animal's hands and legs, and then they pulled it through the ring, so that way the animal was contained and wasn't moving around, and that's how they shechted it. After the area of the rings, you had the shulchanos. You had tables. So on these tables, that's what we mentioned before, that we said the lishkas hamedichin, where they would wash down the flesh of the animals. So we said, but there's the shulchanos. So we said over there they did it for the intestines and the stomach that was extra dirty. The general washing down of the animal was done over here in these 8 amos of the shulchanos. Then you have another 12 and a half amos of the Beis Hamikdash, which is a whole discussion about what exactly it was. But the main part of it is that there was these blocks of wood called nanosim that they had in them hooks. Some say that they had hooks. There was 3 hooks on each side. Some say there was only 1 hook. They said there's 3 hooks, one for a share, for the different size animals. So it had to be hung up higher. That's where they would skin it. One opinion says that they had them on all sides except on the side, this side, facing the Heichel. So the Kohen shouldn't stand with his back towards the Heichel when he's doing the Avodah. And then finally you have another 8 amos. So you basically have an area for the Shechita. You have an area for the cutting up of the animal and the rinsing of it, and you have an area over here. Well, here they cut it actually. They cut it here and skinned it here, and then they rinsed it over here by the shulchanos. So that's for the tzafin part of the azara, which was for the kachei kachim. Now we'll move to the central part of the because we mentioned in the first class that what defines the Beis Hamikdash, the way it was in the Mishkan. You have a building that has a roof on it, and it has two primary rooms: the Kodesh, the Kadashim with the Aron, the Kodesh with the Shulchan, Menorah, and Mizbeach Hakteris. We know from Yecheskel that it's necessary to also have like an entranceway called the Ulam, and all of that is a structure that's covered, and then that's surrounded by a courtyard open to the sky, and in there you have the Mizbeach, where most of the Avodah is occurring. So let's learn about the Mizbeach. So we'll start with some more general things, and then we'll go into the details of the Mizbeach. So first of all, in terms of the dimensions, it was 32 amos by the Yesod, which is around 50 feet, let's say, 51 feet. The Yesod only went on the west and up here by the north. There's a question whether it went in a little bit over here by an amma, on the other side by an amma, but generally it was only on the west side and on the north side. And then you have the kevesh, the ramp. The ramp is also 32 amos. When I say 32 amos, we don't mean with the incline. We're talking about 32 amos if you're measuring from here to here straight. So if you went up, it would be 32 amos. So total 64 amos, but it's not really 64 amos. It ends up being 62 amos because if you remember, we said that it didn't have the side here. So you have to minus an amma, and then we're going to see that it goes in an amma over here, but it's called the seiviv. We'll get to that later. So it was basically overlapping, and so you end up having 32 and 32, but because of the overlap of 2 ammas, it ends up being a total of 62 instead of 64 ammas. Now, right, so I guess the overlap would really just if you're talking about this little thing that extends, not like an actual thing that's there, right? Correct. Then we have, I think it goes to the height. The height was 10 amos, which is around 15, 16 feet. We'll see later a little bit in terms of like being able to, the perspective of it, what that looks like. So it was around 15 feet. Now let's go to the details. Okay, one more thing is the width of the ramp was not the whole width of the Mizbeh. It was 16 amos, which is half that amount. So instead of the full 50 feet, it's 25 feet wide. So let's now go into the details of the structure. Okay, first let's see what it looks like. So if you're going to measure the bottom of the Mizbeach in 770, it's like from this wall over here, all the way to this wall here. And in terms of the bottom, it's from the back, the front of the 770, all the way from even behind the Aron Kodesh, and it would go up to here. And if you're including also the ramp, then you're going to have to go a lot further back. It's going to go all the way till here. That means if the Mizbeach was here, you'd see it's literally the entire room of 770. I think this is the one part of the Beis Hamikdash that when you see that part, it's like, oh, that was big, as opposed to the Eretz Yisrael, when you're wondering how that exactly worked. By the way, for the Rabbi that we showed, it's from like Kingston to Brooklyn, and from Eastern Parkway, almost down to Carroll. In Beis Shlishi, it's going to be 36 times the size. Instead of 500 amos by 500 amos, it's 3,000 amos by 3,000 amos. I have to do a thing on it so we could see what it would look like in the area that we're more familiar with. So the Mizbeh, and the height of the Mizbeh, so this I wasn't able to, I still haven't done it, but I think it goes pretty much to the ceiling of 770. I tried the measuring tape, but it fell over. And I got the laser one, but I keep on forgetting to go. The measuring tape I had to do at 2 a.m, so nobody would think I'm too crazy. The laser I could do, I could do it any time during the day, but I have to go and do it. I keep on forgetting to get around to it. So the Mizbech, I think, is a lot bigger than what people imagine it to be, from here in 770 all the way to the front. Okay, so let's go into some of the details of the Mizbech. So like we said, on the very bottom, it was 32 by 32. Then by the side over here, it went up an amma. So that means instead of being 32 by 32, now it's going to be 30 by 30, right? Because you went in theory in both sides 30, one amma, even though the side wasn't on the other sides. So now it's 30 by 30. Then you're going up 5 ammas, and the seiviv is an amma, so now it's 28 by 28. And then there was the area of the corners, the koronis, so now it's 26 by 26. And then there was an area for the kehanim to walk. This is, by the way, scale the size of a person. If a person's getting on the mizbech, that's how big he is. So the kohen basically needed an area to walk on. So now you're 24 by 24. If you're going to be more precise, it's not 24 by 24. It's 24 amas and 4 tvachim by 24 amas and 4 tvachim. The reason is because your typical amma is an amma in the Beis Hamikdash of 6 tvachim. However, this went in not 6 tvachim but 5 tvachim, and the Yesod went in not 6 but 5 tvachim. So you need to add a total of 4 tvachim. So it ends up being 24 amas and 4 tvachim by 24 amas and 4 tvachim. So that's in terms of the width and the length. How about the height? So for the height, you have the Yesod is an amma. Then you have the area up to the seiviv is 5 amas. Then the area up to the kronis is 3 amas. And then you have the kronis are 1 amma. So that totals 10 amas. But if you're going to be precise, 2 of these amas are also not amas of 6 tvachim by the height, but amas of 5 tvachim. This one's a lot easier to remember because it's the only ones that are individual amas, which is the Yesod. So the Yesod was 5 by 5, not 6 tvachim by 6, and the kronis. Now in terms of the height of the ramp is going to be not 10 amas, because it doesn't have to be as high as the kronis that protrude. It has to be as high as the maracha, which is 9 amas. If you do 9 times 6 is 54 tvachim, but you have to take off 1 tefach for the Yesod, so it's 53 tvachim. So that's for the height of the ramp. Okay, let's... if it's 9 full amas, so it's 9 times 6 is 54. But the tefach of the Yesod, the am of the Yesod was 5 tefachim. So you have to subtract 1, so you have 53. Now look at different parts of the Mizbeh. So for starters, we have over here a chut sikra, which is the dividing line between the upper half of the Mizbeh and the bottom half of the Mizbeh. And it was exactly, so if the whole Mizbech is 58 tefachim, so half is 29 tefachim. It's basically one amma under this, let's do the math. You have over here, we said it's 58 tefachim, right? So if this over here is 5 ammas, so 5 times 6 is 30. Add another 5 for here is 35. So you're 35 up here, you're at 35 tefachim, but we need to go down 6 to get to 29. Because it's 58, half of 58 is 29. So if you go down 1 amma, that's where the chut sikra was. The purpose of the chut sikra, which is brought down in Mefarshim, it wasn't an exact line, as in like very thin, because it's very important that the upper bloods be on the upper half of the Mizbeach, and the lower bloods, the damim tachtenim, should be in the lower half. And so if it's going to be exact, people can make a mistake, so they gave it some thickness. What was it used for? So just, we'll go on a little tangent now. When you look at the karbanis, we say every morning, Yezel Mekayman, so once in a while, if you get a little bored of being bored and being distracted, and you actually read inside, so you start noticing different features of the karbanis, which are very interesting. So for example, the highest level carbon is the chatas pnimis, which is entirely burned. You'll notice by that carbon, how is the blood dealt with? The blood is the chayis, and it's the main part of the kapara. The kayin sprinkle, it uses his finger. He's all the way inside in the Kodesh HaKadoshim or outside by the pareches and then by the inner mizbech. What's he doing? He's using his finger to sprinkle. What's the next level of carbon? It's a chatos. What do you do with a chatos? He uses his finger on the upper half of the mizbeach. On every corner he places it. So you see finger sprinkling to finger placing. What's the next level? The next level is an oila, which is shtayim shein arba, which means the kohen now is using a kli. He went from a finger to a kli, to a vessel, and he's not doing it at all 4 corners, and he's not doing it on the upper half. So he went from the inside to the upper half. Now he's going to the lower half, and he's throwing with a kli on 2 corners, 2 that are 4, because he basically, like here and here. It was done on the corners that had the yesod. So this corner here and this corner back here. And then the lowest level is that it's nishbach, it's poured on the yesod, and which is also similar to placing. Throwing is like sprinkling, and placing is sort of like just pouring it. And you see literally how it goes from the inside to the upper half, to the lower half, to the corner. From finger sprinkling to finger placing to kalim throwing and pouring. So you get a little bit about that connected to the chut sikra. Then over here, we have over here 2 holes by the yesod dremi. So that was either for the blood that was poured. According to the Rambam, that's also what was used for the nisach hayayin and the nisach hamayim. Other mefarshim, the majority of mefarshim, hold that for the nisach hamayim and the nisach hayayin, there were 2 holes over here on the top of the mizbeach. That's where it was done. The Rambam says it was poured on top of the mizbeach, and it flowed down the wall of the mizbeach and went into these holes down here. So either the sheer adam, the extra, was poured there, or that was the kapara sometimes to pour the blood there, or for the nisach hamayim and nisach hayayin. So nisach hayayin, like we mentioned, was done by every carbon tamid, and that's when the shira happened, and the nisach hamayim happened together at the same time. Actually, they wanted it to be the same exact speed. If you learn the mission over there, the hole by the water was a little thinner than the one for the wine, because wine is thicker. So they wanted the hole to be bigger so it could flow out as fast as the water, so they should be at the same exact simultaneous. So it happened during Sukkot. They added the Nisach HaMayim at the same time as the Nisach HaYayin, and it would flow into these 2 holes over here, which then went under the ground into a river that I think went to Nachal. It's not a river, it was like a stream that went to, I think it was to Nachal Kidron. And I think it's brought down that the farmers would pay money to use that water to fertilize their fields. Because there's a problem otherwise with Me'ilah, so they would pay to use that water to fertilize their fields. Now, sometimes the blood would congeal, it would become hardened. So they had over here, there was a tile that had a ring in it. They would pull up the ring, it would let them go down there and clear up the area. If you remember, there was another tile with a ring in the Beis HaMikdash. When they woke up in the morning, they would pull up the tile, take the keys to start the avodah in the morning. Then we have a little window over here, which was basically used if the chatas ha'if became questionable. There's different opinions about the exact circumstances that it was used, and there's a discussion about why it was only done for a chatas ha'if. There's other animals that could have the same problem, other karbanis. Whatever the case is, if a chatas ha'if became a suffix, whether it was puzzle, so you can't do anything with it. You're stuck. If it's kosher, you can't take it out of the outside of the azara. If it's puzzle, you can't use it. So they basically waited till it got a different puzzle, which is called lina. If it was there overnight, which Again, is a discussion, what does it mean overnight? Is it the beginning of the night makes it lean? Is it the end of the night? Whatever the case is, they would put it into this little place over here. And then once it became invalid, it became possible because it was left overnight, then they'd be able to remove it and burn it. Over here, there was also two tables. There was a marble table and a silver table. On the marble table, they would put the meat, even though you usually want to do things in a more of a rich way. But meat, the metals are basically become hot, and it's not good for the meat. It'll make it spoil. So they used the marble table for the meat, and there was a silver table where they put out. It says 93 kalim every single morning. I think there's different times we were sort of not familiar with it. When you learn in the Rambam, we learned it somewhat recently about Hilchos Rosh Hashanah, and you start hearing that when we blow the shofar, we only blow a shofar in the Beis Hamikdash. The main thing is the chatzaitzos. I think at some level we don't realize that was what the mitzvah was. The shofar was makatzer and the chatzaitzos were ma'arichim. It sounds very like a different type of almost Yiddishkeit. I heard a shir from Rabbi Brain. He was saying, what's an egeh, Hilchos Mashiach. He was saying when Mashiach comes, we're going to follow Beis Shammai. So for example, according to Beis Shammai, your kalim can't do work for you on Shabbos. So you can't leave your air conditioner on Shabbos. There's a whole question, according to Beis Shammai, how do you light candles? Your candles are lighting over Shabbos. Beis Shammai says you have to make them hefker. So sometimes it sounds completely strange, you're not familiar with it. But in the Beis Hamikdash, one of the things they did very often, and it speaks about the day that they did the most, they blew on the chatzaitzos. So the kehanim, and I don't know if I put it in here, they would stand, I forgot on which of the tables, and they would blow the chatzaitzos. I don't remember exactly when it was. Now there was 2 ramps. In order to get up here, you can't really get up here so easily. It's 6 amas, which is 10 feet high. Well, this ceiling is not 10 feet high. So they had ramps. These ramps are not accurate. So there was basically a ramp that went to the Saiviv, and the crane would go around, and he's standing up here putting blood on the corners. And some opinions say there was the same ramp on this side so he could come down. Others say no, he would have to go back around. It's pretty precarious, by the way. It's not a very wide area. You're talking about 5 tvachim, a foot and a half. You need to be careful. And then there was another ramp, which is a question why they needed this ramp, because it's a very small purpose for the Yesod. You don't really need a ramp for the Yesod. The Yesod is a foot and a half high. You need to, you just walk up to it on the side. But there was a ramp for the Yesod as well. The ramp for the Yesod, it seems, was only on this side. And then there's also a question, did the ramp start over here at the bottom and come out? Did it extend from the middle of the Mizbeh? There's discussions about these things. The Rambam doesn't say clearly. Okay, interesting. Then I think the question would be: do you even have to? Maybe they have. I guess if they had to stand on the Yesod, that would be an explanation. I'm not sure if they had to stand on the Yesod, but it could be they did. Okay, that's an interesting explanation. And then one more thing is that there was literally a negligible space between the Mizbeach and the ramp, because it's supposed to throw the stuff onto the Mizbeach, and you could throw it, but it was done in such a way that it's not just that the person chose to throw it; it's almost like it requires to be thrown because there's a separation between the ramp and the Mizbeach. So this is basically a review of the Mizbeach. I'll go through it quickly. The main reason I did it is because it's scaled to size. The previous one was just using a picture. Here everything's scaled. So let's go through it more quickly. We have 32 amas over here. Then it goes in 5 tfachim, not a full amma. Then it goes in, then over here you have, so it ends up being 30 amas and 2 tfachim. Then it goes in again 5 tfachim. So now you have 28 amas and 4 tfachim. Then it goes in a full amma for the corners and a full amma for the place where the kehanim walk. So you end up with the 24 amas and 4 tfachim. And then for the height, you have the 5 tfachim at the bottom. You have 5 amas until the Seiviv. You have 3 amas from the Seiviv, and then you have the 5 tfachim of the Kronis. So you have a total of 58, see on the side, 58 tfachim. And then for the halfway point, this will be exactly 29 tfachim. You have the 5 tfachim, plus you're going to add the 30, you're at 35. You need to deduct 6 to get to 29. So that's where the Chut HaSikra was. And then in terms of scaling it, this is a person who's 5 feet 10 inches tall. This is how tall he would be standing next to the Mizbeach. So you want to get up to the Seiviv. The Seiviv is about the height of the ceiling over here. And again, I'm not sure, but it seems that this is around the height of the ceiling in 770. Okay, let's move along to the kier. So I'm actually still in the middle of learning about the kier. But in short, there was a kier between the Heichel and the Mizbech. It was Moshech L'Darim. It was pulled down a little bit to the south. Originally, I think the kier only had, somebody can remind me, I think it was only 4 faucets, 2 faucets. I thought Aaron Uvonov, it wasn't the full amount of faucets, and then they added it, they brought it up to 12, because there were 12 avodas that needed to be done. There was actually 13 avodas, but shchita is ksher bizarre. It doesn't require washing from the kiyur. So there was 12 faucets. There's two opinions about how they wash their hands and feet. One opinion says that that's a more common one. They put their hands on top of their feet and it was washed. So then they could do it on their own. There's actually an opinion that says they put one foot on the next foot, and then however it was done, they needed somebody to hold them from the back. I don't remember how it was done, but they would fall down if they tried to do it. So they would have somebody holding them, and then they would, get into that position and do the kiddush yadayim for raglayim. So that was done with the kir. There was a problem with the kir, the famous issue that the water becomes, anything put into a keli of the Beis Hamikdash, if it remains overnight, it becomes puzzle. So they used to originally just empty it and have to refill it, and then they made a system, a mochni, where they would submerge it into a underground area that was a mayim chayim, which is kosher waters. That way every night they would just put it there and then bring it back up and use it in that way. Now we'll move on to the main thing, which is let's say a prominent structure, which is the heichal. Now I think we may have mentioned in the previous class, so first of all, to get to the heichal, you had 12 steps. Each was a half a amma by half a amma. So that's a total of 6 ammas of elevation, which is it's close to 10 feet. And the heichal itself was a building that was 100 ammas high, 100 ammas wide and deep, which is around 160 feet. Now most pictures that you're going to see of the heichal are going to show you, like what it says, it was revutza kari. It was like a lion, Rachav Milofanov, it was wide in the front, Vatsar Melacharav, and it was narrow in the back. And so they show you a building that goes in. And that's actually most opinions. However, the Rambam clearly says that it was 100 amas all the way through. And regarding the issue of Revutza Kari, so there's two explanations given. One is that the building went in a little bit, but literally it was negligible. It wouldn't even amount to a full amma. And the other one is that actually the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim, the inner structure that we'll see later, that went in from being 20 amas at the big front. It went in again, a very negligible amount that you still see in the back. It was 20 amas wide, but that fulfilled what it says, Revutza Kari. But according to the Rambam, it was all the way around 100 amas by 100 amas by 100 amas. Which 100 amas, like we said, is around 160 feet. And I just want to see, I wrote down over here. It's around 30, if you'd see a building like buildings are different, you speak to engineers, not all of them are built the same way, but for example, the Empire State Building, also the Twin Towers, that type of floor is if you'd see such a building, the heichal is about 13 stories high. That would be the height in such a building, but it wasn't 13 stories, it was 2 floors. The whole thing was 2 floors, and if you walked in, it's like any 5-story building in Coronites that you'd walk in and you look up and the roof is the ceiling, that would be the height of each of the rooms. Each of them was 40 amas, around over 60 feet. So let's learn a little bit about the heichal. So first of all, in terms of the size of the heichal, so we don't have the height with 770, but it's basically both buildings, and to the side over here, how far back it goes. You'll see over here, it'll show more. Basically goes from here and all the way to the front of 770, and then you have to add, you're maybe, I don't know if it's tripling the height of the building here. Maybe 2.5 times. So we said already it consisted of 2 floors. Let's see we mentioned this at the beginning, that all the doorways in the Beis Hamikdash were 20 amas wide, 10 amas wide and 20 amas high, which is around 2.25 floors. So basically every doorway is about the height of any regular, house in Crown Heights. The doorway to the ulam was twice the size. That's why we say, Hashem says, Pischuli kechudesh shel machat v'ani eftach lechem kepischa shel ulam. What was unique about the ulam? First of all, it was double the size. So just physically it's bigger. Also the idea of double, especially if you learn Chassidus, it's not just twice. It's an expression of, completely more than the previous one. And in addition, another unique thing about the ulam is that all other entrances had doors that would close. The ulam did not have any doors. So that obviously also reflects the idea of a much greater level of openness and of giving. So that's what it says. Hashem says, I'll open kepischa shel ulam. Now you went into the ulam, there was basically, it's sort of like like a hallway, like an entranceway. So I think before we're going to get there, it's going to show this would basically be scaled. If this person is 5 feet 10 inches tall, this would be the doorway of the ulam. It's like a 5.5 story building. That was the door. And this is scaled down, a person standing in the door of the ulam. Again, if a person is 5 foot 10 inches, that would be about the size of such a person standing in the ulam. You can see this looks about, it's supposed to be, it's 12 amas, it's 6 amas, which is around 9.5 feet. So you can see it's almost twice the size, and that would be the size of a person standing, scaled down, the doorway to the ulam, to the heichal. Now to see the division, so if you look at it, it's actually not going to be 100 amas, the building itself. It's 96, we're going to see where there's an additional 4 amas on top. So let's see I think it's going to go through the breakdown. So first you have 6 amas on the bottom, that was for the steps, and it was actually, the whole thing was like a foundation, above ground foundation. It could be there was one below as well, but that whole area was filled up once you get up the steps. Then you have the first floor, which is 40 amas, which you said is like 63 feet. Then you have a 5 amas, I'm just going to go through it without looking at the scrolls. You have 5 amas between the first and second floor, which consisted of a kior, which means a nice decorative ceiling. Then there's a Beis dilfa, 2 amas, so that's 1 amma. 2 amas of a space in case rain comes in. I'm not sure how it would come in from the roof, but somehow if rain would come in, it would have a way to be captured there and then come out and not enter into the structure, lower down. Then above that, there was another amma of a ceiling. And then above that was a limestone floor for the second floor. So you have 1 amma of ceiling. The Rambam says kior, design ceiling. Then 2 amas of the Beis dilfa for the water, 1 amma of ceiling, and then 1 amma of lime and stone. Then you have the second floor, 40 amas, and then you have again the same exact 5 amas before the roof. And then on the roof, you had 3 amas of a mica, so basically a fence surrounding it, which is around, we're talking about close to 5 feet. And then on top of that, you had the color erev, which is this sort of like metal pieces, so birds should not come and land on top of like they often do on the sides of the buildings, either because they didn't want them to dirty the walls, or because they didn't want them to bring in like a sheretz, birds of prey. They capture an animal, it could lose it, it'll fall into the Beis Hamikdash. Maybe both reasons, but different Mefarshim bring each of the reasons. Now for the actual Heichel itself, so the Heichel is this huge building, but what's interesting is that the actual Kodesh and Kodesh Kodashim are very small within it. So I think one thing Bichlal to keep in mind when you're learning about the Beis Hamikdash is that the Beis Hamikdash is Hashem's house. And so if it's Hashem's house, obviously we're talking about Beruchnius, all of these things fit with what it represents, Beruchnius. Now we also learn about it because Emes doesn't stay in a Ruchnistic place, it comes all the way down here and you have technical use of everything. But it's first and foremost and primarily, it's the Eibishter's house. And so Beruchnius, obviously the way it's structured, represents something connected to being the house of Hashem. At the same time, like we said, everything comes down and there's details, but you'll see that there's a whole series of hallways, or what they call ta'im. Ta in Hebrew they say a locker, but it's not what it is. It's like these hallways, these rooms surrounding the Kodesh and Kodesh Kodashim. So when you come in, you basically have an area of 22 amas, which consisted of 5 amas of the wall. The wall of the Heichel was 5 amas thick. It seems just in 3 directions, up here, over here, and over here. If you do the math, the way it's presented, it's 1 amma in the back. Somehow there's a 1 amma wall that's 100 amas tall. So you have 5 amas, then you have the entranceway, which is the ulam, which is 11 amas, just like the Ezras Yisrael and the Ezras Kehanim. It's also 11 amas, which is around 17 feet. And then you have the door into the Kodesh, which is 6 amas wide. Then you have the Kodesh, which is 40 amas. Then you have the Kodesh Kodashim is 20. In between, there's 1 amma, which was basically in Bayis Sheni. There was 2 curtains with an amma in between called the amma traxin. And then finally in the back, you have 17 amas in the back, which we'll see later what it is. It's going to bring it up, but it's not relevant. It's basically 17 amas, which consisted of a wall, a space, a wall, a space, a wall, a space, a wall. So 4 walls and 3 spaces. It's basically a wall, 4 walls of an amma each. So that's 4 amas, a space of 4 amas, a space of 6 amas, and a space of 3 amas. If you do the math, it comes out to 17 amas. So that totals 100. You have 17 over here. The one over here is 18, plus the 2 from here is 20. And then you have, with another 20 is 40. With another 40 is 80, and here another 20, so you have 100 amas. This way is a lot easier. You have 40 amas on the north, 40 amas in the south, and then 20 amas of the width of the Kodesh and Kodesh Kodashim to get the 100 amas of the Heichel. So we basically did so far generally the height, right? 6 amas the stairs, 40 and 40 for each floor, and then 5 amas for the ceilings. So 40 and 40 is 80, 5 and 5 is 10, so you have 90, 6 for the stairs is 96, and the 4 amas on top for the fence and the metal. So we have the general dimensions. In terms of what the size is, this is the Kodesh, and the Kodesh Kodashim would be half. That's the size of the Kodesh, and again, Kodesh Kodashim would basically be half of that. So what was in let's get into more details. So this is basically what the structure was around the Kodesh. And again, everything over here is scaled down to size. So if this is 100 amas and this is 5, it's scaled to be that amount. So trying to see the first thing we're going to do, I think, is the doors. So out of like the honor of the Beis Hamikdash, you don't walk in there, you want to go into somebody's house. You don't walk into somebody's house. You knock on the door and they open up for you. You don't walk into the Eibishter's house. So for that reason, what they did is there was two doors over here. It says this door nobody ever went in. It says this is Hashem's door. This is how Hashem enters into the Beis Hamikdash. It was never used. It was called a Pishpesh Hadremi. And then there's a Pishpesh Hatzveini. It was a door you went into here. And it doesn't say where exactly this area was. It could have been anywhere along here. But the point is the Kohen would go in and then they would open the doors from the inside. And the doorway over here was 10 amas, like all other doors. So each of these doors was 5 amas. The space in between here, we said already earlier, was 6 amas. Now the whole entire Kodesh, everything was plated with gold. For some reason, they did not plate. Maybe it's some explanation, something you could learn from it. Maybe it's like there's a famous sikh of the Rabbi about the Agolis, how every little detail was used. But for some reason, they did not plate the areas where the doors opened into with gold. It's almost like it's a waste of gold. I don't know what the explanation would be. Because whenever the doors are open, it gets covered with the doors that were made out of gold. So they did not plate the back, where the doors open into with gold. So that basically when they opened the doors, it covered here, it shows over here, it covered. These areas got covered with the doors, which were made out of gold. Now we'll go into the Kodesh itself. Well, first we're going to actually do let's do the breakdown of the size. So we'll try to go through it quickly. It's more mathematical. We'll go through it. We have 5 amas for each wall, like we said before. Then there's an area here called the Beis HaChalifa. It's also interesting space, different discussion about what it was used for. The simple explanation that's given is that that's where they put the knives that they used for shechita that were no longer good. They kept them here. It's a huge, long hallway, and which was let's go back there a second. There was 10 amas, so we have 5, then 10. Then every wall is 1 amma thick, and just a way to remember it, this is how I remember it. The spaces are 3, 3, 3, 3, 6, 4. So you're gonna have 3, 3, 3, 6, 4, and then also in the back it's gonna go 3, and then right away 6 and 4. So you have 1 amma wall, 3 amma space, 1 amma wall, 3 amma space, 3 times. 1 amma wall, 3 amma space, and then you have the space of 6 ammas, and then you have 1 amma wall, then the 4 ammas, and then another 1 amma wall, and then the 20 ammas in the middle. If you do the math of 5 for the wall and 10, and then you have the 4 walls, 1, 2, 3, 4, with the 12 over here. The 9. I'm already getting lost with the numbers. If you do the math, it's supposed to equal 100. That's 5, 15, 16, 19, 20, 3, 4, 27, 28, 34, 35, 39, 40. 40 for here, 40 for here, and 20 in the middle. So you get the total of 100 amas. And these were they were essentially rooms. And as we'll see, there was actually 3 stories. Now, what were they used for? So if you remember in the first class, we were talking about that there's opinions that on the Beis itself, one opinion counts 31 rooms, another opinion counts 100 rooms. So some say that they kept those items those say that were on the Beis. They didn't keep them on the Beis. They kept a lot of the things in here. The kalim, either valuables that the Beis Hamikdash owned, is no clear. The Rambam certainly doesn't say anything about it. He describes the structure. He does not mention the use of it. Even though he does mention the use of the Lishkas Sanazirim and the Lishkas Amitzayraim and the Lishkas Dira Eitzim, over here he doesn't mention any use. So at least in Hilchos Beis Abchira, it's not brought down in any way. Now I think we're going to go from in terms of the other way to go through the details. So remember the 5 amma doorway, 11 amas of the ulam, 6 amas of this doorway, 40 amas of the Kodesh, 1 amma in between, 20 amas, and then 1, 4, 1, 6, 1, 4, 1, 6, 1, 3, 1. So you have a amma, then you have a 4 amma room, then a 6 amma one, and then a 3 amma one. And again, if you do the math, we'll do it quickly. You have 5 and 6, so you have 16, 22, 62, 63, 83, 84, 88, 89, 95, 96, 99, 100. So that's how you get the breakdown of 100 amas. We'll see later the different floors, but first let's go into the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim. Where are we holding in time? Okay, so for the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim, there's a discussion where exactly the Kalim were. In the Rambam, there's 2 opinions in the Rambam itself. Were they in the inner third, or were they in the inner half? So they certainly were not in the outer half, they were closer to the Kodesh, the Kadashim. Question is, was it all behind the inner third, or in the inner half? We'll just go with the inner half. So over here you had the Shulchan. The Shulchan was 2 amas long and 1 amma wide, and it was set up, which is different, by the way, than most of the opinions say about the items. But the Rambam says it was the length of the Shulchan was along the length of the Kodesh. Then across from it, you had the Menorah. This is where the Rambam is different. The Rambam says by the Menorah, the length of the Menorah was along the width of the Kodesh. It wasn't this way, it was this way. Most opinions hold that it was this way, just like the Shulchan was. And then you have the Mizbeh HaKteris, which was right at the halfway point. Now, just to mention Stam, an interesting thing when it comes to the Shulchan, I think when somebody tells you, when you think of the Menorah, you don't picture in your mind the Melkachayim and the different Kalim that came with the Menorah. You picture a Menorah. Maybe it's lit, maybe it's not lit, but you picture a Menorah. I think a mistake that we make when we picture the Shulchan, we imagine this sophisticated structure with things. A Shulchan is a table. Literally, that's what it was. It was a table. All the items that are given names that were Kalim, they served a very technical purpose. In order to have, they basically had 6 over here, from here to here, was set up this way, 6 and 6. In order to put them on top of one another, these matzahs, that's another mistake, right? They're not bread, they're not challah. It's also to have challah in the Beis Hamikdash. So there's a lot of misconceptions sometimes we attach to it. The different parts, the Menaki Yesav and the Kseisav, they were simply there. They were called the Kalim of the Shulchan. They were there for holding up the challah. Now the Shulchan always had, it's not a can called challah, always had the bread on it. There wasn't even a moment without it. That's actually how they figured out. They have a cheshbon where the Shulchan was located, because the Kehanim, when they would remove the lechem upon him, one group would take it off from one side. At the same time, the Kehanim were putting on the new ones. So the whole time there was bread on the table. The entire time. But the structure is not, that whole thing, that whole contraption is simply to hold the breads in place. The Shulchan itself was simply a table, nothing more. And those are called the Kalim, just like the Menorah has its Kalim and the Mizbeh has its Kalim. What's interesting is not only do we make the Kalim part of the Shulchan, when it comes to the Menorah and the Mizbeh, we don't even know what the Kalim are. Yeah, there was one of these things, and there was another one with size, without size. Maybe there was a deep pan or something, but by the Shulchan, it became part of the Shulchan itself. So the Shulchan is just the table. What? It's always on it, but it's not the table. It's not the Shulchan. Somebody says, I'm looking at the Shulchan. No, you're not. You're looking at the Kseisav and the Menakis. Yes, I'm saying that's the reason the misconception comes up. Yeah, 100%. And it was Taka always there, but it's not the Shulchan. And it sometimes makes it confusing. A kid thinks a Shulchan says, oh, it's a table. and the word is the right word for it. Now, yes, we learn about that, but that's a whole thing, structure. Just like you have all the Melkachayim that's to light the Menorah, and you have these items to do the avodah on the Mizbech. There's an avodah of the lechem upon them to always have the breads on them. They helped you be able to do it. It brings down different. We don't have to go into all these details. Let's look a little bit at the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, first of all, in Beis Rishon, they didn't have this in Beis Sheni, there was the Even HaShtiyah. Either it was completely flat with the ground, or it was elevated 3 etzbais. On top of that, you had the Aron. Either it did cover the whole thing, some people say it didn't cover the whole thing. In addition, there was the Mun, there was Mata Aron, and there was the Shemen HaMishcha, I think also. I don't have any of that there. I think there was also the Shemen HaMishcha over there. And none of that was there. Shlomo Melech already, when he built the Beis Hamikdash, he predicted and knew that there would be the Churban, and he built Matmonius underground. There's a whole Sikha from the Rebbe that explains the significance of that in terms of it still being there in the Beis Sheni. And Yeshiyahu, the 16th king of Yehuda, he was a king for 31 years. He's also the one that destroyed the Avodah Zarah from Malchei Yisrael. We learned it in the first class. He was the one that actually put them into the Matmonius. So that was quite a while before the actual destruction. Now for the Aron, which the Rebbe brings down in the Sikha, Mashiach comes, we're all going to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So even back then, there was this dynamic of space. So I remember I was sitting in a class, I was by Rabbi Paul Thiel, and he said that Teva you could understand. You can understand Teva, it makes sense to you. Unless you can understand, but you can imagine it. I can imagine something flying that weighs whatever it weighs. He said, but Nimnar Nois, it's not just you can't understand it, you can't even imagine it. He said the example is the Aron. Look, the Aron was 2.5 amas, but if you measure from here to here, it was 20 amas. If you measure from here to here, it was 10, and from here to here is 10, and from here to here is 2.5. And that you can't imagine. And what I'm thinking is, I just imagined it. You just described it. So I stopped listening to the rest of the shir, and I was trying to understand why you can't imagine it. And what I came up with is the reason you can't imagine it is because what happens if you take a ruler and you place it from here all the way to the end? What does it say here? 0. What does it say here? 20. What does it say on this side of the Aron? What is it going to say? What's it going to say on this side of the Aron? The rule is not going to get 2 tens on it. The rule is going to be 1 10. What's it going to say? You can't imagine it. It's not possible to, what would it be? It's not possible to imagine it. Now, I'm wondering what would happen if you did it. So that's what it means. It both took up space and didn't take up space at the same time, which is something which is completely beyond the ability of a person to, to understand in any type of way or even to imagine. And I guess we'll end with that. We're missing the final part that I did, which was just show it to you very brief. There's basically a total of 38 time, because you have five openings here, 3 floors. So if you do 5 times 3 is 15, plus 15 is 30. And in the back you have 3. So you had 2 floors of 3, so that's 36. And the top floor did not have 3. It merged into 2. And again, there's going to be discussions about what does that mean, it merged into 2, exactly what it looked like. And in terms of what that would look like, if you were standing here and you walked into the Heichel, you would see this door. And if you'd be able to see through, if you had X-ray vision, this is what you would see. Again, there's a lot of different opinions about this, because you could see that this is as high as the first, this is as high as the door. And here it goes up to here, and it doesn't go up to the 2nd floor. But this is one of the ways that it's explained what you would see if you had X-ray vision. You have all these things, and in order to get into them, there was basically, you'd go into this one, because we said that's the only one that had a door. And then from here, you'd be able to basically get around to the other ones. Everyone had doors. One of them had 5 doors. If you learn the Rambam, he talks about this corner, one had 5, but each of them had openings that allowed you to enter into the other ones. One to the right, one to the left, and one above. I guess they used a ladder of some sort, or whatever they needed. And that way you're able to get to any one of these, what are called